Thank you all for joining me. The aim of this presentation is to walk you through my GitHub project, and the project obviously is located on my GitHub account. Anything that you see here, data, opinions, facts, they are just my opinions, and they do not reflect my current employer or the city in general. Just some terms about flooding. So flash flooding is also called extreme rainfall events. There's also coastal flooding, which is storm surge. That's, for example, Hurricane Sandy, Katrina, these big storms that really push the winds and the water, and it can cause serious damage, as we all can tell. But there's also fluvial flooding, which is riverine or also river flooding. And there's also high tide flooding, which, depending on where you are looking at it, it's called nuisance flooding or sunny day flooding. The real interesting about this 311 street flooding data set, street flooding complaint data set, is that I found out that this data set most likely includes flooding from any source. So definitely the four above, but it can also be water main breaks, it could be pool flooding, it could be shower flooding, whatever. I can't say for certain. There is no field on the 311 guide that specifies these flooding events. So I'm just saying that street flooding complaints, the flooding event could be from any source. And just a quick point about citizen science data. We are analyzing NYC's 311 data. Street flooding complaints are not equal to flooding observations. So what does this mean? Street X has complaints of 50. Street B has street flooding complaints of 45. We can't say for certain Street A had more flooding events. We can say for a fact that there's more street flooding complaints, but this analysis is not analyzing flooding observations per se. It's street flooding complaints, which could be a function of population density, folks' willingness to actually use 311 data, a whole array of things. Data quality is something to consider while viewing this project or any single project that uses citizen science data, okay? So if you don't get anything from these slides, there's a lot of assumptions with 311 data. So just consider these. Does anybody have questions before we all jump into my GitHub account and actually view this project? Chidi, Nathan, were there any questions about those slides, citizen science data, flooding events?
Thank you, Mark. So far, so good on the questions. Encourage everyone, if you have any questions, throw them up in the chat and we will get them to Mark for you.
Okay, perfect. And I think I said this in the beginning, but for this hour, we will be going through my GitHub account that contains this street flooding project. We will go through folders, files briefly, and then at about 2:30, we will be viewing insights, plots, maps, graphs, figures, etc. It's the end of this conference. I want this to be exciting. I am so excited that I'm presenting this project and this topic. So for the end of this project, we will be exploring some of these figures together. But if everybody can either screenshot this link, I think somebody posted this in the group chat, but if you can follow along with here, with this project link, let's all go over there. So this site is called GitHub. I won't go into what is GitHub or what is Git, but this is where my open source code lives. A fun fact about this project, all of this project, I would say almost all of this project is open source, except for one thing. In order for us to make a JSON request to open data, if the file is quite large, they require us to submit a form and apply for an API key. So I've saved that as an alias, and that's how I am making this 311 request. But everything else in this project, data, wrangling, raw data, exported data, notebooks, Python code, figures. This is an open data conference, and 311 is citizen science, and essentially all of this code is open source. So you can favorite this project up here. You can star this. You can fork this project. But okay. So as I said, I'll just go through some of the overview of this project, and then we'll probably view some of these notebooks together. Okay. This is an introduction paragraph about what this project is. And essentially, this project explores, I would say, 4 main items. 1, the distribution of street flooding complaints throughout the 5 boroughs. 2, how street flooding complaints are changing over the past 11 years. 3, the average and median response hours of these street flooding complaints. Just a quick tidbit, this 3rd bullet point, it came at the end of this project. So just keeping everything open source, I added that point at the end. And the 4th bullet point, I've included case studies from Midland Beach, Staten Island, and Arverne, Queens. These 2 areas have a history of flooding, of coastal flooding, flash flooding, and I thought it would be useful for us to kind of get a really hands-on look at some of these areas. You can launch an interactive notebook if you click on Launch Binder. So if everybody wants to actually inspect the data with me, you can click on this Launch Binder. Oh, restart. We're starting now. So all of this code is interactive. It's open source. I provided an example with all of the packages installed, the correct Python version, and creating a binder file, it does take a while, but if you do want to inspect the data in an interactive way, this will eventually load. So, okay, some of the prerequisites of this project, I would say the basis of Python or other programming languages, knowledge of data analysis, and the basics of Jupyter notebooks. That is where we execute this Python code. Okay. This project, it does recommend beginner level Python proficiency. Okay. Let's go back to my binder file. Okay. And this is the interactive notebook. So we can execute all of these cells. And for folks that understand Python, you can inspect the data with me through this interactive notebook. Okay. And then I've just created some sections about where the analysis lives. As I said, we have 3 main notebooks. One is called mapping, which we're interested in the spatial distribution of these complaints. Second one is time series. And then the 3rd one is case studies. I've also included descriptions for you, and we can view these files as static web pages. If you click view and the mapping one, okay, this is an static web page, but this is how I format all of my projects. Okay, table of contents, and we will get into all of these things at 2:30. So anyways, I've provided links for the data sets used in this. The first one is 311 street flooding complaints. The second one is street CSCL dataset. The 3rd dataset is the NTA, neighborhood tabulation area. And then the 4th one is boroughs. And the data dictionaries for these datasets above can be found in the data raw folder. Okay, let's just open that up, and then perfect right there. I've also saved a lot of these output files for you. So I think there's over 30 plots in this project. I've saved most of that underlying data as CSV files. So if you're not comfortable with Python or R and you prefer Excel, which is great, you can just load all of these export data files in the data output folder, okay? And then these are all of the CSV files. I've created a table of contents for you. And then I've even created screenshots of the CSV files. So this one is complaints within TA. This is the shape of the data. So there's 26,000 rows and 40 columns in this CSV, and then just a preview of this. Okay. This is the NTA borough count CSV, and then you can preview some of this data here. Okay. Because this project is open source, I've saved all of my data wrangling notebooks for you. So the first one is how I queried the 311 street flooding complaints record from NYC Open Data. The second one is how I clean the streets data set. And then the third one is the data inspection notebook. And we can view some of these things, as I said, in the static web page link. Okay. Querying 311 street flooding complaints with the Python library SodaPy. So I could even show you where I queried this. Yep. I think this API call was right there. So you can see this query, select all rows where the descriptor has the word flood involved in somewhere, and then it outputs right there. This is what we got back. And then we are just interested in the street flooding category. Okay, perfect. Let's go back. And then these are the open source applications that I use in this project. I've included some resources for you, open data, filing a 311 street flooding complaint. And I've also included screenshots that I found on Facebook and Twitter. This is by NYC DOT, and this is by the NYC 311 folks. Okay, so how about we view some plots and some insights? Were there any questions about this? Were there anything I should go over? Anything that was unclear?
No, I think we're good. We're ready for the fun stuff, Mark.
Okay, the fun stuff. So, yeah, let's see if we can explore this data, what I came up with, how do we use some of these insights to further explore possible questions or things that we can ground truth for separate experiments. I would say let's go view the first mapping notebook. Okay, so I'm going to go over this pretty quickly, but please stop me if I'm going too quickly. If there's a figure or a graph that you find interesting that I should explain more, but I will kind of go through these quickly. Okay, and yeah, let's have fun. Just some cleaning workflows. Okay, this is a hex bin map of the count of 311 street flooding complaints, and you can see here that the Midland Beach of Staten Island is quite a hotspot for these complaints. You can also see parts of southern Queens, the Jamaica Bay area, but also Borough Park has a lot of complaints. And this is just on a continuous scale. Okay. I think it almost seems like Midland Beach has about 400 street flooding complaints, which is just amazing. This is a heat map. And as you can see, the east side of Staten Island, southern part of Queens, and I believe it's the Borough Park area of Brooklyn. This is just a plot of all the street flooding complaints. I think I've included this so that folks understand that street flooding complaints are all over, except for this airport, I believe. But there's a lot of street flooding complaints all throughout the 5 boroughs. Okay, this is a choropleth mount of the count of street flooding complaints per square mile by neighborhood tabulation area. And again, we can see this is on a continuous ramp, and we can see that the Midland Beach section is quite large. We can see southern Queens. I believe this is Arverne. Okay. This is another choropleth map, but we just binned it differently. I believe this is Fisher-Jenks scheme right here. So it's just a different way of binning some of these classes. And we can almost see that there's like a divide, southern Brooklyn and southern Queens, and the east side of Staten Island. It kind of looks like there's a natural break on the southern part of the hill. Again, I'm hesitant to infer anything about this project because this is not intended to create a risk index or a predictive modeling. So these are just questions that I would ask if I was analyzing some of these plots, that it does seem like the southern part of this moraine here that I believe was formed by the Wisconsin Glacier. I would be interested in why there's such a drastic divide. Okay? And these are all of the plots in one figure. These are the kind of street flooding complaints per square mile by year. So instead of just aggregating it by area, I was interested in where were the hotspots in a specific year, in a given year. We can see that the previous year, 2020, that section of Midland Beach I think it looks like it almost had 35 complaints per area. Again, this is choropleth maps with different classes. I think this is the Fisher-Jenks class. This is the same data, but visualized with a hex bin map. Yeah, we can see that there's one part of the Midland Beach section that experiences a lot of street flooding complaints. Okay. I've also aggregated this by looking at borough. This is Queens. This is Brooklyn, the Bronx, Manhattan, Staten Island. I mean, I can't help but think that this area, it just dominates this whole figure. I believe it's almost 400 complaints within this hex bin. So it's almost difficult to see the other distributions of street flooding complaints because this one area is so impactful. And then these are all of those boroughs in one. And then these are just some simple bar charts that identify some of this data. So as we said, New Dorp, Midland Beach area of Staten Island experiences a lot of street flooding complaints. There's also one section of the Hamels Arverne Edgemere section of Queens that was in second place. And the second figure is the total count. It's not normalizing it by area. So we can see that the Midland Beach area called in, I believe, just over 700 street flooding complaints over the past 11 years. Then I was interested in the response time for this data. This is the average response hours of street flooding complaints. Median response hours. There are some outliers in this data. So that's why I use the median, because the average, there were some really extreme values with this data. So, and then these are just the two plots side by side. So we can say that if we're interested in the average response time of street flooding complaints, we can see that it's usually below 38 hours, I would say. Okay. Does anybody have any questions or a specific deep dive with a plot that I can go over for you? Let's see here.
Yeah, we're good on questions so far.
Okay, perfect. 0? Okay, let's...
Oh, Mark, sorry. We have one question from Kevin. From Lauren. How did you determine response time in reference to the response time maps you just were going over?
Yes, there's that's a great question, Lauren. In the 311 data, there's a field called when the timestamp of this request it was first generated, and then the time when I think a staff member closed this request, or they addressed this request. And then I just subtracted when this complaint was filled out, submitted, and then when the complaint was addressed. So I can show you there's some field that has both of those fields, or there's some field that has both of those time values.
Thank you, Mark. And we have another question from Kevin. This is related to different factors that may have influenced when the complaints or where the complaints were made, like what time of year, preceding precipitation, affecting the number of complaints. Did you look at any of those factors?
I did not. And again, that's another great question. If I'm looking at this plot, I would be interested in some of those factors. So what is influencing this plot? What are the questions I should be asking this? What are the assumptions that I should test? But I did not look at by year, by event, by what events impact this. This is just a quick data process of aggregating some of these counts. But I am interested in those factors. I mean, I think eventually those are the type of questions I would be interested in is, okay, it's great that we have all of these plots and I can start to see some patterns, and I have a few questions that I want to explore. But for this project, I think it was just analyzing this data, exploring this data set, and just exploring what's in here. Were there any questions with specific plots or specific anything that jumped out at you, or anything that a question that you thought of while I was going through some of these?
Mark, I think this is actually a question that I have for you in relation to a presentation that you did earlier in the week for NYC Open Data, where you went over a lot of kind of the basics in your tutorials that you created when working with data analysis in Python. So my question for you is, how do you, when you're creating a visualization for data, what is your thought process for creating an effective visualization as far as color choices, plot choices, and the types of tools that you use?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nathan. I think that I'm not sure the skill level of the folks here, but I program in Python. I mainly use the matplotlib library and the Seaborn library. Over the past few years, I've preferred Seaborn because I think it's just a really intuitive package that has very aesthetically pleasing plots. So I would say like most of these plots are in Seaborn, but some of the geospatial plots are in the Python package GeoPandas. But I think you can probably see this from now. I prefer bar charts, graphs in this darker blue color. I think that this is a very solid blue. And then for choropleth maps, I prefer Viridis, which is the yellow-purple scale. And yes, some of these hex bins, I prefer blue, not only because this involves flooding, so it kind of like looks like water, but I think blue is a solid color for this. And for these hex bins, you want a very gradient scale. So the real darker colors, you want the more like magnitude values, and you want to kind of like dismiss some of those lesser value bins. Let me find the choropleth map. Yes, so I prefer Viridis. I just like, again, it doesn't have reds. It doesn't have things that in the past, there's some like accessibility issues of reds and other things. So I like mainly code in this Viridis color, and you can see it, I think, right there, Viridis CMAP. So yeah, that's a great question though, because this field is difficult in itself. Like, how do you communicate risk, but how do you create a intuitive plot that can visualize that risk? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for walking us through it. I'm just curious what your thought
Sure.
process was. Thank you.
Let's look at the time series plots. I see that it's almost 2:40, 2:45. So we'll probably go through this quite quickly. But please post your questions in our group chat. And if there's anything that you would like me to go over, take a deep dive into, I would be happy to. So this notebook includes data that has time, involves time series, just my pre-processing steps. Okay. So this is, of course, the first figure, count of NYC 311 street flooding complaints by year. And we can see that in 2018 was the highest amount of these complaints. It would be interesting to see if this correlates with actual flooding events. But again, this is citizen science data. There's a lot of quality issues that we perhaps can infer that 2018 was the worst flooding year. But these are all questions that we can explore. And of course, in 2020, how does working from home affect this? How does COVID affect the user's willingness to complain about street flooding, etc.? This is broken out by borough. Again, broken out by borough and year. This is a stacked bar chart of number of complaints by borough. And we can see 2018 was the biggest year. Okay. It's just different ways of viewing this data. As you can see, there's probably over 30 figures in this project. I'm really trying to ask myself questions that I did not think about when I first began this project. These are line charts by borough, and we can see all of these charts in this page. So the second figure is the percentage of total within each borough and by year. So we can see that 2018, regardless of borough, was quite a big year. And then we have some area plots on the bottom. These are just some plots that analyze frequencies. This is a plot that displays the count of NYC street flooding complaints per day. And you can see that I believe there was an event in 2017 that almost had 250 complaints on that day, which is quite astounding. And then these are just plots by a different frequency, daily, weekly, monthly, and then yearly. Quickly. And then I just did testing if there's seasonality. Of course, there's more advanced methods to this, but this is just a simple box plot. And we see that the month of May has a high median value of street flooding complaints. And I presented all of those box plots on the bottom part. Okay. And then I think another thing that I took away from this is that the second quarter really stood out with the count of street flooding complaints. And then these are just a plot of daily averages. This includes rolling averages by different frequencies. And then back to that whole citizen science data thing again. This plot is interesting because do you think that there's less flooding events on Saturday or Sunday? Or could that just be because folks are less willing to report street flooding complaints when they're home? So I guess this plot kind of highlights the possible errors with predictive like modeling or assigning features with some of this data. And then I have all of those plots on the bottom. So a lot of New Yorkers complain about street flooding between, I would say, 9 a.m. and 12, 13. And it's just different ways of cutting up this data. So and then I have some anomaly plots. So as we said, the highest daily street flooding complaints were on May 5th in 2017. And I believe it was almost 250 complaints. So, and second place was December 9th in 2014. This is weekly, so sometimes you can report a street flooding complaint that day or the day afterwards. So I've just grouped it by week ending, highest monthly street flooding complaints, and then yearly. Okay. Were there any questions with these plots? Anything that jumped out at you? Anything that I can elaborate?
Well, I just did a quick check, and it, in fact, was raining on Friday, May 5th, 2017.
Okay. Where is that? That's in...
Oh, May 4th. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I always find it interesting that we did not know that data point, but because we can visualize the data here, we can find out some of those extreme days. So were there any other questions before we get to the case studies one? And I'll briefly go through some of those case studies.
Oh, yes. So let's get into the case studies. We have just a few minutes left.
Okay, perfect. Case studies. So I'm going to go through this. I'm sorry, but I'll go through this quickly. The whole project is on my GitHub. Please send me questions about this, but let's go through this the final section of this project. Wrangling. Sorry about that. It's just a lot of pre-processing steps. Pre-processing. Okay, so the street that had the highest amount of street flooding complaints. When we say the word street, we are saying street segment, and it was Grimsby Street in Midland Beach, Staten Island, that over the past 11 years had just over 100 street flooding complaints, which is astounding. The second one is 157th Street in Springfield Gardens, Brookfield, Queens, and that just had over, I think, 85 street flooding complaints. This is normalized by area, by linear feet, and in this one, West 228th Street in Marble Hill, Manhattan, came out on top with just over 14 complaints per 100 feet. So, case studies, minutes. Okay. These are all of the street flooding complaints in Arverne, Queens. So this is just a dot point map with the streets overlaid. Okay. This is a continuous color RAM scale of the count of street flooding complaints, and you can see that this street on the west side of this area, I believe, has almost 40 street flooding complaints just on that street alone. We can visualize the data within different bins, so this kind of minimizes those outliers. And again, it's this northwestern street over here that has just over, well, between 22 and 48 street flooding complaints. So, and then this shows the count of street flooding complaints per 100 feet. And you can see that there's probably a lot of flooding from the bay with this area. Again, that's just an exploratory question. We can't say for certain that that's happening, but this section, it does seem like there's quite a lot of bay flooding, sunny day flooding, tidal flooding. Okay, I'll go through this quickly. For this section, you see that Beach 84th Street really is the outlier here, with almost 50 complaints on that street segment. And then we just normalize by 100 feet. And then for the final case study, Midland Beach, Staten Island, 3 minutes. This is just a point map of the street flooding complaints. Again, you can see here something that's interesting with this plot is that there's one street, I assume it's Grimsby Street, that is just dominating this area. This is a core pleth map that has just been differently, okay? And this is just normalized by 100 feet. And you can still see that this area, I guess, northeast, experiences a lot of street flooding complaints. Okay. And then, yes, it's, you can see that Grimsby Street, that was the one outlier that we could visualize from the map. It had just over 100 street flooding complaints just on that street segment. Even if we factor in area, Grimsby Street really dominates that area. So, and I think that's it for me. I hope this was interesting. I hope folks got something from this. I hope that we've explored future questions together. Does anybody have any questions about these case studies before I think we're almost out of time, but I can take questions.
Thank you so much, Mark. One day I'm looking forward to your masterclass on Python visualizations. And I think, your work's been a great resource to us at our agency. So thank you so much for this presentation. It was wonderful. And I guess to close off, what was your kind of, any insights that you discovered while doing this data analysis, or what do you see for this project in the future?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for those kind words. I think that, again, I was just exploring this data set. I think kind of looking into, do these streets really experience chronic street flooding, kind of testing out some of these assumptions, and I would say ground truthing some of these figures, especially Grimsby Street, Staten Island. But I think just understanding that we do experience street flooding, and it's a thing that we should address, and we should not stop until we can address some of these concerns. So I think future steps is taking some of these questions and possibly ground truthing, as I said.
Thanks so much, Mark. It looks like we have one more question. This is from F. Wee. They did not, so it looks like you didn't write it in the chat, but you can feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask it yourself.
Okay, thanks. Hey, Mark, it's Franny. I forgot to change my name on that. I had only caught the tail end of this, so I apologize if you had covered this. This seems to be really useful data for people who do hydraulic modeling. Okay. Has there been coordination with modeling teams?
That's a good question. So I haven't seen anything so far. I've seen that there's a few folks, I've read a few research papers that they've used this data set, but I haven't seen the data that you're referring to about some of those flows and some of those prediction hydraulics. But no, this is just a out-of-the-box Python exploratory project that just asking like myself, what's in this data set? What can we learn from this? And why is Grimsby Street such an outlier? So,
yeah, and I would certainly encourage you to reach within, other departments to highlight the work that you've done. Again, from my perspective, if I'm wearing like my modeling hat, which is a lot of times urban flooding is modeled, right? So there's a rainstorm and they have to do a historical event and they have to understand where that flooding occurs, and to be able to truth check it is really vital, because people pick friction factors or the size of a pipe, but they might not realize that there's a tree stuck in one of the pipes causing the flooding. So having this kind of visual truth check based on complaints, I think, really helpful to a lot of people.
Yes, I agree, for sure. Any other questions? So the project can be found here again. You can look through all of the notebooks, the wrangling notebooks for folks that don't feel confident in Python or R. I've exported a lot of the raw data there as CSV files, and I've even included screenshots for you. So let's say that we're interested in the NTA borough count. If you do download that file, this is what this data frame looks like. So, So thank you everybody for attending this. I know it's Friday, spring is here, beautiful weather, but it's a big honor that I was presenting this to you all, and that folks are interested in street flooding.
Thanks, Mark. Can you also let them know again, like the best way to contact you?
For sure, yes. Let me, so on my a GitHub account. Let me just share this again. Okay. I can be found on Twitter. LinkedIn is probably those two best, Twitter and LinkedIn, and of course GitHub. Okay. But yes, please say hello if this is interesting. If folks are interested in, okay, was a great citizen science project, but how do we, as we said, ground truth some of this data? Please reach out. And all of this code is open source. So
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you to everyone who came. Thank you to NYC Open Data, and I hope everyone enjoys the wonderful weather this weekend. We're anticipating very, very few flood complaints.
Yeah, that is
great
true.
weather.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Mark, can I get like 2 more minutes?
Sure, yes, for sure. And
Okay, I don't want to keep everyone else here, but I'm sorry that if I missed some of the discussion here, but as part of the complaints, do you also have like flood depths too? Like, is it at all?
That would be my dream project for any. I would have flood depths. I would have flooding events. So there's a lot of water like main breaks in this data set.
Yeah.
And I think if we're like thinking about street flooding, I don't consider like a water main break as like an event, but in this data set, it is. There's no pictures. So in theory, I think residents, they can have like a ponding effect on one of those curb ramps.
Yeah.
Which is different from like a whole length of a street, width of a street flooding event. So yes, it doesn't have anything. That would be second steps with this.